This is Social Leopards. I'm Bea.
And I'm Beth. A leopard is a solitary creature living in the jungle, but often not seen or noticed. Are you a solitary creature trying to navigate the social jungle?
This show explores loneliness and the many ways forward. Welcome to Social Leopards.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today, we are talking with Mandy Capehart, a certified grief educator and somatic practitioner. For anyone who has provided care to a loved one during a terminal illness, it's challenging on many levels and can be hard to discuss. Bea and I have been talking for a few months now about doing a bit of a deeper dive into the topic of grief in general, and welcome Mandy to this episode.
Oh, thanks you so much. Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you.
Awesome. So let's start with a brief intro, and if you don't mind, maybe you could share the story that led you to your decision to write a book about restorative grief.
Yeah, so I started grieving as a very young person. I don't really remember a year in our life that we weren't dealing with a death, a move, an illness, a loss of some kind. And for anyone listening that's not deaths all the time, that's not all grief. Any type of transition or lack of met expectations, they all cause a grief response in us, and that's completely natural. So when my mom was diagnosed with cancer in 2015, it was right after our daughter was born in 2014, and we had just been dealing with a lot of really significant losses leading up to that, including her own illness that was undiagnosed until late in the year. And so when she died in January of 2016, I went into a shell shock. I'll do 1 week of put my head down and get all the practical things done. And then I turned around and flew home and realized now the work begins, and I don't know how to do this without her. So this will be interesting. So I spent the next few years struggling to figure out exactly what that looked like. And I went through a ton of different books and education courses. And it really came down to realizing my community does not know how to tolerate that I'm not okay. Being not okay is something we love to say, but we don't know how to hold space for someone who is not our definition of okay. I started writing the book just myself in pieces. It wasn't a book at first. And then in 2020, at the beginning of the year, as everyone in the US is understanding what COVID might mean for us, I was dealing with another miscarriage, losing a job, and that's my mom's death anniversary. So it was a horrible year, and I was hoping that everyone else would back off and COVID would get resolved so I could have all the attention I needed in such a terrible beginning to a year. So when I lost my job again in March and the world started to shut down, I recognized I can't be a part of a community, let alone a global community that has all of this untended grief that's about to be generational and this complete lack of literacy around how to help others and help ourselves without making it worse. So I started writing the book as a very practical, let me teach you. And at that time, the book specifically is speaking to spiritual communities of how to support people without getting involved in a way that is inappropriate or without making it about you and your understanding. And then in the fall of that year, there was a wildfire in our town that destroyed nearly 2,500 homes, including a handful of people that I knew. So it became a very practical, hey, here's a rough draft of my book. How is it? Does it help? Yeah. What can I offer? What does it look like to feel supported through this kind of a loss? Because as everyone in the Valley was very split on, well, how do they move on? How do we get them to stop grieving? How do we give them what they need and now they should be fine? Mm-hmm. Instead of understanding that this is now part of who they are. The book came out in 21 after I finalized everything. And at that point, I had transitioned my career into focusing full-time on grief work. And it's been really hard and really wonderful ever since.
So something that you said triggered something that I deal with, I think, every day. So how do you support someone without getting involved? And I think I play tennis with a lot of ladies that do a lot of things, but there's always someone that has a situation that occurs. And I think you're right. It's very difficult to be supportive without I guess we struggle with what to say, but I also think we struggle with getting too involved because it might trigger something in us that we don't want to experience.
Yeah, people are avoidant, right? We use platitudes and offer phrases that seem really innocuous and calming and soothing to someone because we don't want to have to be around their discomfort. We don't want to be discomforted around them. Their uncomfortable situation is too much for us in a lot of ways. And so part of that awareness of, as that person on the outside, as that grief supporter hearing so and so is going through a thing, our first job to do is to ask if they want input. Offering an ear, someone who can just listen, is often so much more valuable than we realize, and we don't have to have answers to fix things. But because we have this idea that there's stages of grief that are linear and simple to move through, we have this assumption that we know so much and that we have all this life experience that means we're the experts in lots of things. That's the place where we get to practice decentering our understanding, right? So if I come to you and I say, B, I'm going to be an opportunity, or I'm going to offer an opportunity for you to just grieve, and then I'm going to give you some answers about pathways forward, you would say, Mandy, no, that sounds terrible, because there's no way you could possibly understand, right?
Right.
And that even itself as a griever is really hard to say. You don't want to hurt someone's feelings. You don't want to decline their support because you need support, but you just don't know what it is yet. And so for the people who are, hey, my friends are always going through something and it's really difficult to deal with, or I am trying to figure out where my role is in that place, just ask, hey, what's my role in this? I want to support you. What does that look like? I love using the word support instead of help. Yes. Because what we think is helpful is often very centered on our experience of what is helpful to us. Mm-hmm. If when my mom died, what was helpful to me because I was a state away was knowing my family was well cared for. What would be helpful for someone else might be something completely different.
That's very smart.
It is. That's a great response. Thank you.
What is the phrase that we should all avoid? I can think of the one that used to trigger me after my dad died.
What was it?
I know what you're going through.
Oh gosh. Yeah. No, and you have
nobody
no idea
knows
what I'm going through.
It doesn't matter if your dad died or
right.
your mom died.
Yep.
Everyone's experience is very unique, and everything that surrounds it is very unique. And so to try to, I understand the sentiment there, but not helpful.
No,
I had to work really hard at recognizing the intention behind someone's words after my mom died. And certainly in the first few years after her death, that was still very raw for me.
Yeah.
I know what you're going through. I know how you feel. I allowed people to say, I know how you feel, if they'd asked me how I felt first, and they could reflect it back to me if they then had like a similar experience that they wanted to share. But when someone is saying, I know how you feel, again, they're trying to say, I'm the expert on your experience. And that's not the intentional thing they're trying to say. That's the implicit thing they're trying to say. Exactly. So I'm a big fan of, you might call it making things awkward, but I like to say making it explicit, taking the implicit, making it explicit. So hearing the phrase, I know how you feel, for me would say, I think you have an idea of what I feel, but why don't you ask me? Because it might be surprising. There's an opportunity to gently guide people back toward a greater sense of emotional intelligence here, where you're also saying, you can come toward me in this, I'm scared and I'm hurting, but you can still come toward me without catching what is going on or what I'm feeling, and feeling like you'll never get out of it too.
Yeah, because people are so terrified of getting involved, and also terrified, I think, of saying the wrong thing. So we have almost like a special script. When someone dies, oh, so sorry for your loss, blah, blah, blah. There's never anything more than that. Most recently, I was a little bit more emotionally intelligent. And I asked this one person, I said, I can't imagine how you must be feeling. And if you need something, I'm here for you to listen. And I was really proud of myself, because that was a different thing that I've ever said.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. To answer your question too, the one that I wish we could all forget is everything happens for a reason. Specifically because the reality is sometimes that reason is that people are terrible. Sometimes that reason is that illness is not always preventable. Sometimes that reason is this was preventable and you chose
Yeah.
a stupid path. It's not helpful to point out the reason behind something going wrong, especially if that reason is supernatural,
Mm-hmm.
undefinable, indescribable,
Mm-hmm.
like unreal. Like
Mm-hmm.
to what end, right?
Right.
To the end that causes some people to feel comforted, that there is a
Mm-hmm.
sense of spirituality in their life,
Mm-hmm.
that rationale and intention and
Mm-hmm.
purpose behind anything going wrong is not, one, something that they have to take responsibility for, which is an entirely different conversation. But two, is not necessarily something they have to live in fear of happening ever again, or that
Mm-hmm.
there's something coming later, so it's okay. Well, along with the everything happens for a reason is they're in a better place. Those are the two that really make me hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of my spiritual practice being different or whatever, because that is a wild assumption that has no evidence whatsoever that we
Mm-hmm.
can look at and feel truly like certainty about. And all of
And
those phrases are offering certainty.
and to your point, I've had to come to the realization that my father is making some stupid choices in his life that I cannot stop. Okay. And I fully expect him to die of a heart attack. And my mother, who has dementia, they want to be at home, by the way. They have limited care. They do have some hospice. Somebody will call me if I don't show up that day or the next day and say he's dead in the bed. And mom is going to be sitting there because she can't call 911 because she doesn't know how to dial the phone anymore. And he's choosing this, and it's not going to happen for us. It's going to happen because he chose this, and I can't make him do something better. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a rough place to have to settle.
Yeah,
Right?
it really is. You get to the point where he's still of sound mind, so quote unquote, and right, exactly. And Rudolph Walter will not go into a place where he needs to go because Rudolph Walter is very frugal. I'm saying that really nicely, but he is who he is. But it's a very irritating, frustrating thing because I don't want him to die. But I'm like, Dad, you're choosing this. And you're being very morose. I'm like, no, I'm being realistic. Mom's in a wheelchair. She cannot care for herself and she can't call 911. So it's not going to happen for a reason.
Yeah, I think that the
Wow.
pain of recognition in that moment for both of you, for him and for you, obviously making assumptions on his part too, is that there is no common ground where you guys are going to be able to agree on those practical, tactical things that need to happen. And we also know, because there is no certainty that we can hold on to or that we can hang as a banner over our homes, there are a lot of unknowns that we're trying to simply avoid, right? We're moving from a state of avoidance and not having to face the total discomfort and pain of what could possibly come to pass. So whether that's trying to explain the importance of healthy nutrition to someone who is hell-bent on supporting being the financial foundation for McDonald's, or looking at someone who is actively harming their body with substances or avoiding exercise or causing harm to others, we cannot argue someone into a state of openness and clarity when they are in a responsive state of sympathetic reactions, protecting what they want, not knowing or having the capacity to face what they don't want, to face the things that are hurting them or causing them and their loved ones harm. It's not a malicious act typically. It's simply not a conscious act.
Right.
Yep.
And it's neglect at its very foundational root. But I went through it very similarly, where my stepmother was choosing to pretend like everything was okay with my dad. And I think your dad is doing a little bit of the same thing, like a little bit of denial, because if you accept the situation for exactly what it is, then, oh my gosh, you're in a whole different place. And so I think he's trying to maintain
Yep.
normalcy, his normal daily routine. He wants to stay in the home. He wants to act like she's okay, all of these things. So it's very difficult. And that's him grieving to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
It absolutely is. You're asking someone to transition everything they've known for the last however long into a completely new, unpredictable to some degree, experience, especially when you're saying, hey, this is high risk, this is not good, sustainable, long term. Come into this other situation, and theoretically, you're promising sustainability and safety and security. But we also don't know that.
Yeah.
We don't know that. We can't guarantee any of that. And so there is a grief that comes with the end of our lives that starts early for some people and starts almost never for others, where they can't really have not created a sense of safety within themselves where they can face hard truths and reckon with their own mortality.
Yeah. That's a very true statement.
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the things that sometimes I hear Bea say is I'm all alone taking care of my parents. And we know that she's not alone. We know that she has friends. We know that she has family. But that word, or it's just alone, I hear it from others too, who are going through massive change due to things that are being initiated by grief. It is a very lonely and often isolating process. Mm-hmm. So in your experience, are there common patterns that you've observed when you're talking to people who are going through those types of phases? Or I don't even know how to explain.
Yeah.
Beyond what I've said.
Yeah. Caregivers, especially, I think it's something like 80% of caregivers are family members. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that number, but it's really high. That typically means they're not trained. Typically means they're training on the fly. I happen to be a caregiver in my daily life, and it is not something I trained for, and it is something I am training for on the fly. It is incredibly overwhelming to consider, is this person's life in my hands to some degree? It is really difficult when you recognize there are very few people in my life who are going through this at the same time or something similar. I don't know anyone going through what we're going through. I, in that vein, can talk to my friends and tell them, but without having it as a lived experience, it is really hard to grasp how intense that can be and how overwhelming it can be. Now, that said, one of the things I think, and that I have witnessed in clients and people I work with, is that isolation, the emotions of the isolation, the despair, the sadness, the overwhelm, the anxiety, they don't necessarily flare up when we're with people, because when we are with people, our nervous systems are more regulated. We have people that are on our same level and they're coming toward us. And so we don't feel as isolated. But when we're alone and we have those big flare-ups, it feels really disruptive to think, I'm just going to call someone who can listen. We're not going to, as grievers, want to rock the boat. We don't want people to think we're complicated or difficult to be around, because we know more than ever we need to be around other people that don't need anything from us. So I think with grief around being a caregiver, especially family members who are caring for parents, but also have children of their own or even grandchildren of their own, that's like that sandwich generation where the ages just fit perfectly. There is a real, honest need for groups that are full of caregivers. There's a few people that I've worked with in the past who do that, who provide care for caregivers, especially family members, because of how isolating it is. And the part of it that goes almost unnoticed too is the fact that as a caregiver, you're also grieving the relationship to the person you're caring for. It's not going in as a hospice worker to a stranger's home, building a rapport for a few weeks and then saying goodbye and transitioning that family onto after death care. This is someone that you knew your whole life. Whether or not you had a good relationship with them is part of it. Whether or not they're cognizant of how much this costs you emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually is part of it. There's so much nuance that you really can't explain to anyone. But if they've lived it, they can at least honestly and sincerely say, I think I might know how you feel, and then reflect it back.
Yeah. So how do you think, are there strategies for maintaining relationships that you have? Or like you said, how would you, I thought what you just said, I would love to create a support system for myself. Mm-hmm. How would I do that? Like just create my own, or are there places I could reach out? Or
I think it's a mixture of both. I think part of this work we have as grievers is doing our own inner understanding of what matters to us. So if we are whole people, heart, mind, body, spirit, we have a sense of core values within us that we're leading with toward everything that we do. And when we start to grieve, those values change. Those values change on a daily basis often enough. They change throughout our lifetime over and over. And maybe if my value of authenticity is really loud right now, that doesn't mean my value of mercy or justice is quieter. It just means, or absent, it just means they're a little softer. Maybe not the forwardist thinking value that I use. That was a terrible sentence, but you know what I meant. But when it comes to deciding, should I start a group? Should I join a group? I'm yes to both. I am very much that person that says, if you have a core value of connection, for example, then what does connection actually mean to you in this current season of life? Does it mean having a peer group that can reflect back and give you ideas? Does it mean having a therapist who is specializing in grieving family members? Does it mean having a coach that actually works with caregivers or hospice care workers? Does it mean going through online education courses? There are so many resources now that we have access to if we just know how to Google it correctly. And I think that's a big part of it is I will tell you endless times I've sat down in front of a blank Google screen and thought, I don't even know how to say what I'm trying to find. In those moments, my value of curiosity feels really truncated, right? Like can't even get to curious because I don't even know what I'm curious about. But I have taken those moments and gone to someone else that's not as dysregulated and grieving as I am to say, this is what's hurting. Help me find the words to explain that. And that part alone, that really benefits the people who have peers who can say, let me reflect back to you what you said. You don't sound clear or coherent, or you actually sound extremely coherent. And I know exactly what you're trying to say. And I heard about this person, book, organization, whatever that is, because we are at least, thankfully, in a season of, at least in the United States, where grief literacy is taking a front seat and resources are becoming far more available, which I think is important. But I wouldn't start with leading a whole big group. That's for sure. I would, right. If you want to start a group with yourself, I would pick one or two people that you trust, but then keep it as casual as possible because you don't want the added responsibility of now leading all of these people. And we all know if we heard about a group starting, we assume the person starting it has some kind of authority to do, and we go in trusting, which is great. But if you don't have capacity to lead well, that's a really important thing to add.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. So speaking of grief literacy, you have a podcast. And I have listened to several of those episodes. And for those experiencing or anticipating a loss of any kind, I feel like that is some very sound education, information, guidance. And I think I listened to one, and forgive me if I don't paraphrase this appropriately, but it was about honoring your emotions and being in that space, and even if it doesn't feel comfortable. Can you talk a little bit more about how one would go about honoring their emotions as they're undergoing this?
Yeah, our emotions are energy in the body, right? We have thoughts that create meaning. We have emotions that overwhelm us, that excite us, that we can feel at the same time and be in complete contrast with each other, right? Both and happy and sad at the same time. And then we have a spirit, this sense of connection and intuition and wisdom that resides within us. But the reality is those emotions really start as sensations in the body. So if you think about the last time you were nervous, something in your body started to feel a little bit different, whether it was butterflies in your tummy, tight shoulders, maybe shortness of breath. We have a sensation that then goes off to our brain to say there's something going on, and we create meaning about it, which is where emotions come from. And the reality that we live with is that we want to understand the emotion as it exists on its own, as if it could exist on its own. Like, I feel sad because of all these things happening around me. Sure, but also you feel sad because your body recognized a threat around you and your brain interpreted that as a sad thing. The nervous system is constantly scanning for threats, and it's creating a reaction within us just to provide safety and find security. Okay, so there's the sciencey, nerdy part of it. But the truth is, our emotions are so powerful, and we give them all of our power without really agreeing to it all the time. So when you have a movie that makes you cry uncontrollably, Return to Me in our house is one of those ones. Old
Oh, I
Minnie
think I
Driver
remember
movie.
that.
So
Yes.
good.
Yes.
But those tears are flowing, right? I want to feel that way if I'm choosing to go after that movie. That's a beautiful thing. That's a cathartic thing. But if I don't ever hold space for myself to ask why I feel the need to have that cathartic release, I'm going to continue returning to a place where I'm expressing it, but don't necessarily have the bigger picture of it. That's a better way to understand our emotions, is to just to sit with them, to let them belong, to be okay with them being present instead of repressing them or pretending about them or deciding I can feel differently if I just put on a big smile and move on. It's the same thing with watching happy movies, right? The other night I was feeling really low and I decided to watch an old funny movie that it has terrible reviews. It's one of my old favorites and it's so dumb and so funny. And I know exactly why I wanted to laugh, because I knew I needed the endorphins, I needed the chemical release in my body to move beyond just feeling the heaviness that I was feeling. Emotions are so powerful. And if we continue to just bypass the heavy ones for the sake of toxic positivity, for the sake of not overturning the apple cart, for the sake of making everyone around us feel comfortable, even when we feel wildly uncomfortable, then our bodies will say, okay, cool, this is not the right moment to deal with that emotion. No problem. We'll bring it up later. The longer we do that, the more we repress our emotional states, the more will flood out of us in a moment when we really can't afford, so to speak, to have that happen. That in itself is 10 times, 1,000 times more overwhelming than sitting with myself and saying, I need some space, actually, because I'm filled with rage and I want to figure out why and do something with it.
Yep. Yep. You're bringing me back to my dad's memorial service where it was like 6 months after he passed. It's a whole story, but my brother and I ended up having our own memorial service for my dad at his favorite church. He was a minister. And so we went and held this thing. And I remember as soon as I saw the very first person from my past, from that town, because it was in a different town, not even the town that I lived in at the time. And as soon as I saw that first person, the tears started. And I'm telling you, I cried like a 3-year-old, bawled my eyes out nonstop for the entire time, all the way through until well after the service was over. It was cathartic, but that's what I needed in that moment. And I don't think anyone judged me for that, but I think I'm sure there were a couple people who were like, man, he passed away like 6 months ago. What's wrong with her? And I didn't really care at that moment.
Yeah.
So.
And if they did carry judgment, that says a lot more about them and where they're at in their comfort level with grief. No one is expected to be over a death 6 months after someone dies. 6 years, 60 years. Death impacts us and changes our DNA. Grief is part of our life experience of being a human. This need to rush people along is tied to productivity and capitalism. It has nothing to do with our humanity. And so every time I hear, are you still grieving? Are you over that? You talk about this all the time. Did you really change your whole career to talk about grief and death all the time? Yes, because I am committed to the discomfort of this situation on your behalf. Because when my daughter grows up, she's going to be in a world that's a little bit safer to have an emotion. She's already almost in middle school and has conversations with friends about emotions that if I could have had those as a child, I think life would have been very different. It blows my mind and she inspires me. And I realize that is because we're instilling in her the confidence to go forward and be okay being not okay. Go forward and be okay being uncomfortable, and setting boundaries around what that looks like, how to have a conversation with someone when they've upset you. That can be really grievous as well. We grieve our living relationships with people all the time and lost friendships. What if we could train each other to actually resolve conflict instead of just ghosting and walking away? Then we don't have a loss of relationship to grief. So it all mixes together. It's all important. And divesting it from one another and divesting from our fullness of our humanity is what got us to this place where we think, you're still grieving 6 months later. He died 6 months ago. My mom's memorial, we didn't spread her ashes until we spread my grandfather's ashes at the same time. 2 years later, 3 years, I think it was 2 or 3 years later. I can't even remember. It was so long. And we finally said, we should maybe do something. But we were all spread out. So what serves the people who are mourning is what is necessary and right and good.
Yeah.
Sorry. Little rant about someone judging you. I get
no,
very
that's
protective of people who are grieving.
I think there's a difficulty with people having honest conversations about emotion. Like what you just said about even coworkers, you're having a conflict. You can't say that because you're going to hurt someone's feelings or it's going to, I don't even know, but we really just, like you said, we just walk away, we ghost them, that's it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really, it just creates more conflict in the end, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of assumption about how a person is feeling. And like we said with the earlier platitudes, we assume we know. And so we act from that rather than acting from curiosity and compassion. But we can't practice curiosity and compassion for others if we've never experienced or practiced it for ourselves in our own inner world. So it's why grieving people are quiet. It's the long version of why we just don't say anything, because they're not going to be able to understand or hold space for us unless they've gone through it.
So you emphasize a whole person perspective in your approach. So how do you adapt grief support to meet the emotional, physical, spiritual needs of individuals?
Yeah. So I look at the whole person as heart, mind, body, spirit. Heart being the emotional states we go through, mind, of course, being the thoughts that we create and love to sit on and ruminate over, body being body, and spirit being that sense of connection to self, to others, to our community, and spirituality if we hold a spiritual practice. As a griever, when we are going through life, we have all kinds of opportunities to see those pieces of us that we want aligned in that center of our being, our understanding, just thrown asunder. Right? One little offhanded comment, everything happens for a reason, can send us into a tailspin. And it can be really hard trying to get it back together, which is the phrase I hear so often. I just need to get it together. What people are not able to identify in that is what it is, right? What is it that feels off? The truth is everything feels off. Our thoughts are going haywire. Our emotions feel unpredictable. Our body aches and hurts and we're not sure why. And our spirit, we just feel disconnected from others and ourselves. And so that whole person approach really requires us to be willing to sit in the discomfort with ourselves as individuals and go inward. What is it about my emotions that are a little too scary right now? What is it about my thoughts? Without a lens of judgment and critical thinking, but with a lens of compassion and curiosity and wonder toward ourselves, an observational mind, as they would say in meditative practices, that can observe ourselves without creating or attaching meaning to it. Wow, you're crying right now. And staying with that. Because what I find the most surprising here is we will immediately, as we talked about, go to spirituality to try and fix things. We'll go to what we've known has worked for us, or we read sometimes a lot of books when there's grief, thinking there's an answer in there, or we just suppress our emotions thinking if I don't express them, then I'm not feeling them, right? Almost true. I don't really think so. But what really happens the most often when people get into that inner space is their body starts to get noisy. They start to notice their tummy grumbling more often. They notice aches and pains that they maybe didn't have before. Maybe they're more fatigued. And the truth is, yes, you are all of those things and more, because your nervous system was used to a pretty wide window of tolerance early on where you felt like you could anticipate that something was coming and be okay. You could go from a focus project to a disruption and back without too much agitation or brain fog. But when we're grieving, that window of tolerance in our nervous system just shuts. It gets a lot more narrow as a baseline. So we're already starting from a deficit. So the body is doing a lot of work trying to keep up with what we're going through. Mary Frances O'Connor is a brilliant professor at the, I want to say, University of Arizona. I'm going to blow up. Her glass lab is amazing. And I can't remember what the acronym stands for right now, but she has written The Grieving Brain and The Grieving Body. And both books are based on the scientific responses, like to the studying what grief does to those parts of our body. It's baseline. It's the body we live in. It's the thing that's collecting data around us at all times to give us information to survive, right? That lizard brain is giving us those quick reactions so we can stay alive. Grief is such a mental, emotional threat that we don't see it as a physical impact, but we surely notice it when we start. So that whole person approach allows us to say, yes, talk therapy, yes, emotional expression, yes, spiritual guidance, and yes, somatic or body-based support that teaches us all of these parts are integral. Because if we have unhealth in our bodies, everything is affected. If we have unhealth in our emotions, everything is affected. If we're spiritually disconnected in any way, everything is affected. We can't just divest part of it and think that things are going to work out okay.
In your book, and it's just simply Restorative Grief, right? That's the name of your book?
Yeah,
Thank
Restorative
you. There you
Grief.
go ahead and show it.
Yeah, it's backwards, but Restorative Grief, Embracing Our Losses Without Losing Ourselves is the name of the book.
And so that was almost that whole question. So that's what you discuss, embracing losses without losing yourself.
Yeah.
So can you expand on what that means in practical terms?
Absolutely. Part of the thing about grief that people don't expect are the secondary losses, these pieces of ourselves. When I got married, I didn't think of it as a grief event. Yay, I'm getting married. And then I started realizing all of my friends have withdrawn, thinking I'm married and I don't have time or need people around anymore. And I started to grieve those relationships. But I also realized I'm grieving this single version of myself. I'm not just me anymore. I'm a partner to someone else. Secondary losses come in all shapes and forms, and we don't think about them until it's a little bit further down the line and we realize the impact of what's happening. Like, especially with body-based grief, secondary losses, like maybe we've lost weight and we don't know why. We're eating, but we don't realize that we're eating terribly or not eating consistently or not eating enough. So what we have to grapple with, in addition to our initial grief event and secondary losses, is this new sense of self that's coming to the surface, because the old version of us is part of what we lost when we had the grief event. So this version of us that, like the version of myself when my mom was still alive, is not here anymore. I evolved. I had to become something different against my will, which is why grief is so scratchy and uncomfortable, because it is completely against our decisions. We would never choose it. But what we are also given the opportunity of is exploring, well, what new values do make sense for me in this season? Maybe my spiritual practice changed dramatically after my mom died and after, so many other people have died. Every single time something new surfaced. That part of it is transformational if we want it to be. It doesn't have to be. I'm not a big purpose into pain person at all. Pain is painful and it can be painful, and purpose is great if you want it. There can be purpose in everything that we do. But we are really in charge of redefining what means something to us, what moves the needle for us back toward alignment, toward feeling really centered on who we are becoming, and exploring that without shame of we've been a bad person or we've done bad things, guilt, right? We want to do it through a lens of curiosity and compassion and self-kindness, and understanding that this is not just a journey that we're on. This is something that's shifting who we are as people. Which direction do we want to shift? Everything we're doing moves us closer to or further from the person we are and the people we're becoming. And to believe otherwise is a very fear-based approach, which is okay because that's safe for a lot of people, right? That gets us through to so many different things. And there is still potential to say, I don't want to remain static. I don't want to be so resistant of change anymore. It's guaranteed. I can't. I've tried to control it. I've tried to limit it, tried to restrict my exposure to it hundreds of times, and it has not worked yet. Maybe there's a possibility for something a little less painful, a little more intentional. And that's really what this book does. It's a 31-day guidebook in the sense of, like I said, it was written to spiritual communities. So it's great devotional style for people who are used to a short missive, a short little piece, and then an activity to go through if they want to. But it's very broad. It's not specific to anything other than, hey, my denomination, this is the framework I grew up in. Chew the meat, spit out the bones. What serves you, take it. What doesn't, leave it behind. Because as much as it would be lovely to have a very linear path and a script and a checkbox list to make things easier, there's no such thing. So this book really invites us to explore what could be possible if we wanted to experience something different in our grief and we're not sure where to begin.
Yeah, I like that. And also, you talk about change. I think the one frustration I have with my father, for example, he is so afraid of change, maybe because it's fear or whatever, and I think it's making things more difficult for him. Yep. And of course for my brother and I, because we watch this, my mother is not who she was, and I've accepted it, and he's still insisting on pretending that she is the same person she was. And I know that's a protective denial thing, but I think it makes things almost so much worse, and it creates so much frustration and anger in me, because I think they both could be experiencing a better quality of life if you accept where you are and try to do your best versus trying to pretend that it's the same as it was. Or the hallucination that she's going to walk again or she's going to become better. She's not. This is it. And let's support her where she is and do our best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting into a state of acceptance. And it is a state. It's a state that we can flow in and out of as well. Some days we can accept things, and other days our brains, this is why I love Mary Frances O'Connor's work, our brains literally don't recognize and have not yet reordered the understanding of here, now, and closeness. So if the brain understands the world and our role in it as here and now and closeness, then I know that this computer in front of me is here and it's now. And when I leave this room, I can trust that it's going to remain there. I also don't have any closeness with the computer. If someone were to take it, it would be okay. I would find a new replacement. But with people, my family being in the other room, I trust that they're going to be there when I walk out. And if something were to happen and they weren't, it would actually take my brain a really long time to come to a place of acceptance that things have changed. Does that mean I'm making poor choices? No, my brain is trying to understand. And if I'm actively working against that understanding, it's tenfold harder. Part of who your mom was and is still in there, but there are transitions and pieces of who she is that make it really hard for those pieces to be visible, to be experienced. So it's also, while it is likely true that your dad is going through so much resistance, and you can get to the bottom of resistance if someone is willing to, it's also true that his brain is doing a lot to try and say, you're right, everything is safe. Here's what we know to be true. Just rely on that, move through your day, everything is fine. It's not malicious, it's just fear. It's and programming.
Yeah. Whew. Deep stuff tonight.
It is, yeah. It's great though.
I have one more little kind of thing that I wanted to do before we start wrapping up here. Sure. I had like dozens and dozens of questions, right? But man, we got deep into it today. Yes. So what role do cultural narratives play in shaping how we experience and process grief? Because I know that's part of what you deal with, is that the immigrant culture, and I think that sometimes shapes it, but
yeah. World cultures deal with grief so dramatically differently than we do in the West. That's number one. And when you look at different cultural groups specifically, you're finding traditions and rituals and communal remembrances that allow us as individuals, allow the participants to metabolize grief in a safe environment where they are connected to each other. So going back to the idea of a social group that we talked about earlier, there is safety in a social community like that. And when you are willing and with people who have ritualized loss and the expression of ongoing grief in a way that it is present, it is not denied and hidden, but it is acknowledged and honored, there's safety and continuity in the cycle of life and death, where it's not so hidden away, but it's actually just a reality that we face. That alone allows individuals to wrestle with their own mortality and become far more present in the moment. And when you think about different cultures, like in the US, right, different people groups and whether it demographics, I think, again, it goes back to this idea that as the Western culture, we are so focused on practical productivity and capitalism. And if someone is sick or needs more than 3 days away from work, they're not earning me money. If someone shows weakness, they're no longer reliable. We've got these black and white dichotomies instead of recognizing a both and existence of, wow, my employee is grieving and they're still showing up at work. Talk about fortitude. Talk about expression of resilience. There is no place on earth where someone can escape the expression of grief or the experience of loss. We don't get out of this alive, and we will all face grief at some time or another. If we recognize that, then we can begin to build the cultures around us where we are confronting stereotypes or problems in our families or our communities that are saying, like, this isn't necessary. We don't need to talk about grief. Be grief literate isn't a thing. Everybody knows that someone dies eventually. That's literate enough. And I'll give you an example. Going back to the fire in our town in 2020, a few years ago, I forget now that it's 25, sometime in the last few years, a sculptor who was born and raised in this area, really wanted to honor the community who rallied around and designed this very large sculpture that looked like it was a carving out of metal of people dancing. And the interior, it was a large tower. It was probably like 15 feet tall. They were carved into the four sides of the tower. And then the interior would have red and yellow lights. And it was supposed to look like people dancing among the flames, right? We're not afraid. We're dancing. The problem is that for me, 3 people died in that fire, number one. And it was intended to be placed right next to the freeway. And in Southern Oregon and all over the West Coast, everyone here is trained to spot fires and call 911. So if I see even a glint of smoke, we are immediately looking up, is this a prescribed burn? Does it look brown or clear? What's that smoke? If I saw lights, I can't tell you how many times I have seen flames and called 911, whether I've been the first one or not. So this idea that right next to the freeway, the thoroughfare of our town, are going to be sparkling red and yellow lights all the time, it's either going to scare the crap out of people or desensitize them, because it was going to be in an area that's had fires. The lack of grief literacy led the people who did not understand to say, it's just art, get over it. My insistence on grief literacy was what started this whole petition and ultimately got the project canceled, not because it wasn't a beautiful piece of artwork. Put it in a museum, put it anywhere. Don't put it downtown, and maybe also think about the design over your own emotional need of expressing to the people whose family members died in that fire. It's not a very beautiful piece to them. And I get that art is subjective, but it's a matter of recognizing what are the needs of this community? How do I connect to the community instead of connecting just to myself and my needs? Those shared principles are so important.
No, that's a very strong image.
It is, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Oh, and good for you for standing your ground and educating and teaching people too, and winning that through your own fortitude, honestly.
People are so unaware sometimes of what they're doing. It's not like what you said, it's not intentional, but someone needs to recognize it. This is probably not a good choice right now.
A lot of the time I will say it's not intentional, and that's the problem. What would happen if we were being intentional right now? What would be different? Would I be having such a big reaction? Maybe. I'm reactive, but maybe not.
So how do mindfulness and neuropsychology inform the grief support strategies that you teach?
Yeah, it goes back to that here, now, and closeness in a lot of ways. Having an awareness of the fact that you're not just a person with wild emotions, but you're a nervous system reacting to the world around you is super important. Without an understanding of our neurobiology, we are just making our best guesses. And our anecdotal evidence of people is always going to be lacking some kind of information about their background, about their foundation, about their family and social structures. And I have a background in anthropology, so I love going into cultures, people groups, and just observing. But I also know at the inside level, we have nervous systems that are looking for safety, that are looking for connection, and that are capable of co-regulating with one another when there is safety. And so to even consider grief work without an understanding of how the nervous system works and how the brain works feels like very irresponsible to me. And I'm not a therapist. I'm not a biology student. I'm not a neurobiologist by any means. I would love to be someday. That's a lot of learning and money for school. But point is, I think that the intentionality behind recognizing there's always more to understand about the human body and the way the body responds to foods. How much greater could it be as we're responding to non-physical things entering into our bodies, our existence? There was something I'm going to butcher it. There was something I was watching about molecules and how, because they're always in motion, our atoms are always in motion, and molecules are always transitioning from thing to thing, that we are so interconnected that we could be drinking water that Abraham Lincoln drank once upon a time. And like I said, I'm butchering it. You'll have to look it up on your own to know if I'm making this up and sounding crazy. But that alone tells me that my understanding of grief cannot be limited to a textbook, to an expression, to an experience. It can't be limited to my own observations. It has to be so much bigger. And if we were created in a way to experience life in such an abundant, expressive way, grief is a part of that. How could I ever stop thinking that my whole personhood, including the stuff I just don't understand, is a part of it? Yeah, with people, I try to keep the sciencey part of it out. So that's why it sounds a little bit like, let me come up with a good anecdote here. but yeah, the brain, it's such a young science. It's such a young field of study that everything we learn about how the body works on a neurological level, neurology is so young, is going to affect how we grieve and how we find what feels like healing as well.
Yes, agreed. I'm very intrigued that your grief education is paired up with the somatic practitioner approach. That is very interesting to me. I've connected myself to a lot of social media accounts that have a lot of videos showing some of the just the release exercises, things like that they're calling somatic healing. And I've used a few of them.
Yeah, same. Yeah. They're pretty effective.
Yeah. It's amazing how I think there's one where you tip your head up and then you look up and then you close your eyes, but you're still looking up, and how that somehow resets something.
Yep.
And it's almost miraculous sometimes.
Yeah, you're talking about the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory and the way that the nervous system can attaches itself to how we are connected to our nervous system, and how we can use that and our understanding of attachment to recognize how grief shows up in the physical body. So the responsibility I feel as a grief educator is grounded in a trauma-informed approach, especially when the somatic practices are introduced. We cannot move toward body if there is no safety, right? So you think about someone who has experienced, let's say, car accidents, multiple car accidents in their life, and they have a physical response, a visceral response to cars when they're in them, whether it's I have to be the one driving, whether it's I get nauseated, I get car sick, I can't tolerate being here. There is something in their nervous system that is reporting back to the brain, this is not okay, get safety. The same thing is true with grief, right? I have a memory every time I pass a certain billboard going toward the town where my mom died. I have the ability to notice in that moment if my body is feeling anything that needs attention, and it will come up if I can slow down enough. I can also avoid it, right? But allowing ourselves to let the body lead teaches us that our brains are not the first and foremost and only tool or powerhouse in our physical selves. Our body is so wise and so prepared and so designed to scan for threats that we have to believe on some level it has been collecting a lot of data about a lot of threats for a very long time. And so the work of people like Abby Blakesley and Peter Levine and even Diane Poole Heller, like all of these incredible, and I'm leaving out hundreds of names, incredible people who focus on a somatic polyvagal approach, not even polyvagal only, but just a somatic approach to exploring the impact of trauma in any way in our physical bodies is going to lead us back to then having to have cognition of grief awareness, right? Because not all grief has trauma attached to it, but pretty much all trauma has some kind of grief attached to it. And so being able to recognize when there has been something traumatic that's happened, create a space of safety for someone to practice somatically with a practitioner is important. And I do the same thing on social media. I'll put some somatic practices out that are very simple, that aren't really, I'm not guiding it actively as we go. And so it doesn't feel quite as authentic, but that's the nature of social media. Just put things out and hope that people resonate with it and find you to do more work. But the need for somatic awareness and not cathartic releases without a container. Like we were talking earlier, we can't just have a big cathartic release and then move on. We have to have a container of safety so that we can say, now, where did that come from? Now, how can I finish that stuck movement, finish that space, finish that sensation in our bodies so that it releases and metabolizes through us instead of coming back around every time?
Yes, very good. Have a somatic practice or a mindfulness technique or anything that is like a beginning go-to. So if there was somebody listening today who felt some distress or was undergoing grief, is there a grief-based somatic practice that is a starting point?
Yes and no. I have the privilege of working with people primarily who have access to full movement in their body. But when people don't, whether by disability or disfigurement or just trauma, can't access certain things. And so it's easy for me to say, oh, sure, do some breath work here, do this. But sometimes breath work isn't safe. Sometimes it's really causes a big reaction in people. Mm-hmm. So the one that I tend to lean toward the most is orientation, allowing someone to sit in a chair or wherever they are and keep their feet flat on the ground if possible. And just to notice the support of the chair beneath them as they look around the room and identify colors or specific items, or notice the thing that they are encountering around them has their best interest in mind, right? So if I look and I see a plant off screen right here, and I see this plant right here behind me, and I can take a deep breath and recognize the color of greens that I'm seeing and the container that they're in, and give myself a groundedness, but really an awareness of the room and the space that I'm in before I do any kind of somatic grief or trauma work is necessary, right? Because we're looking for safety, security, and belonging, and safety is primary. And so if I go into a setting or I'm anywhere and all of a sudden I feel very anxious, whether I have an anxiety disorder or this is just a momentary anxiety that's coming up, creating a sense of safety around us is really necessary first. And so that's part of why I don't love the internet version of somatic work, is just because we think, oh, okay, I'm in the grocery store, let me go ahead and do this thing. Okay, but someone's going to run right into you. Or I'm driving my car, I can't stop and do this. Or a butterfly hug. They're great if I'm not driving a car or if I'm not standing on the soccer field. Okay, but I can orient myself. If I'm standing in the middle of the soccer field and I'm panicking, I can look around and notice my teammates. I can recognize where I am in the field. I can gain some grounding by noticing how people are watching us. Orienting is a really powerful way of giving yourself space to find that here and now again, because the body can only be in the present moment unless we figure out time travel, in which case I have no answers.
Oh, there you go. Before we say goodbye, it's been a wonderful conversation for sure.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yes. Yeah. Are there any final words that you would like to share? And of course, to let us know how to find you out there on the internet?
Yeah. You can find me anywhere under Restorative Grief. My podcast is Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. It's the book. And I'm at Mandy Capehart on all the social media platforms. Okay. And I think I would say that your grief matters, and it is okay to let it matter. If it matters, let it matter, because too often we allow ourselves to minimize it, to get small, just to fit in and to create a sense of safety. But when that safety no longer feels so safe, we're left with more questions and more grief. Giving yourself permission to make space now when you need it, often possibly before you are grieving and before you need it, is such a gift to you in the future for when that moment arises that you just can't keep it repressed any longer.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Amen, sister. Thank you one more time. And with that, we will say goodbye to this episode and see you next week, everybody.
Yep. Have a great week.
Hey, Social Leopards. Don't slink back into the jungle quite yet. We have 2 important messages to share. First, remember to like this episode, drop us a comment, and if you haven't done it yet, follow this show or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can reach us on social media. You can also email share@socialleopards.com to contact us privately. All links are in the show notes. We love and appreciate hearing from those who listen to the show.
Second, we want you to know that this show is not intended to be a replacement for professional therapy. If you are struggling or if you need to interact with another person, check out the show notes for resources. Thanks for listening.